can we start, Mr. Sönsken?
Yes, please start.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome to our today's webinar, Supporting Your Employees in Times of Crisis, jointly organized by SustainMarkets, Samhita and Collective Good Foundation, and Indo-German Chamber of Commerce. We have eminent speakers, experts in their field, who are going to guide us through today's webinar, which will take about 1 hour and 15 minutes. Our speakers are Dr. Ajit Bernhard. He is the chief economist of the Aditya Birla Group, whom you know probably because he's an omnipresent person in the media, writing in many of the journalists of the papers, and also present at many of the seminars, and of course nowadays also present in this webinar. And I'm very grateful for him to be here with us. Then we have Simon Thorsten Wiebo. She's from Bayer Crop Science, one of the oldest German companies, by the way, in India. Then we have Priya Naik, the CEO and founder of Samhita Social Venture, and Pradeep Parameshwaran. He is the president of Uber India and South Asia. And finally, Chandan Kumar, the coordinator, Working People's Charter. We have a very tight program with a lot of presentations. Everything that you will hear, you will see, you will get it sent later. So from that angle, it'll be easy for you. And later you are also allowed to ask questions. Before I hand over to Dr. Bernhard, I just wanted to basically tell you, or which you of course know from the newspapers, that the topic of migrant workers in India is a huge topic. It's in the papers every day, not only in India, but also all around the globe, because it is a critical factor for India to be able to run its industry. And basically India Inc. is depending on the migrant laborers. On the other hand, at the moment with Corona, we have a huge challenge because the migrant laborers, they don't know where to go. They basically want to go home, but there are no trains, no buses, no nothing. So it's a huge challenge for them. This is what we want to discuss today with you. Whether we have a solution for the problem, I'm not sure. Maybe we get some closer to a solution. We all know the government is trying to find solutions. The companies are trying to find solutions, but the situation is so fluid and so basically unclear for all of us that it is a day-to-day operation that we are doing at the moment. Therefore, ideas, reflections are absolutely critical, and this is what we have today. So therefore, I would now like to ask Dr. Bernhard to start his first presentation for 10 minutes. Dr. Bernhard, please.
Thank you, Mr. Steinruecke, and good afternoon to all the participants, and thank you for inviting me for this webinar. As you know, India's workforce is roughly about 480 or 490 million people. Of these, there is an estimated 100 million who are what are called migrant workers. The percentage of migrants in cities, large cities, is even larger. It may be as high as 30 to 40% of the workforce. India's total workforce of, as I said, 480, 490 million, a very large proportion, maybe 85 or even 90%, is what is called in the informal sector, which means they basically do not have a written contract. I mean,
So we seem to have lost Dr. Bernhard. Let's see if he's coming back. Dr. Bernhard, are you there? Otherwise, Mr. Steinruecke, we should maybe just switch to the
here.
next speaker.
Mr. Sebastian, I'm here. For some reason, I got muted, but I'm very much here. I was saying that India's workforce, which is about 480 million, a very large proportion, perhaps 85 to 90%, is what is called informal sector or unregistered sector, meaning these are workforce or workers who basically are to work without a proper registered contract or employment contract. I mean, I'm just simplifying it, but essentially, in my mind, what that means is there are three kinds of protections which are not available typically. One is health insurance. Second is retirement insurance or retirement support. And third is unemployment insurance. So really, in a crisis like this, the pandemic induced lockdown, and we are now in the fifth week, and India has had one of the most stringent lockdowns. What that means is 3/4 of the economy has been shut. I mean, it's practically shut. So especially, except for essential goods and services, all the goods and manufacturing is currently stopped. Now, workers, those who are in the organized sector, perhaps have been asked to stay at home, or if they are staying in colonies or townships near the factories, that's one thing. But most of the unorganized workers or informal sector workers, many of them actually depend on daily wages or daily incomes. Their livelihoods are very precarious. For them, practically, it has meant that income has stopped. There may be jobs have been lost, and it has actually become, in fact, the immediate food security problem. So, of course, most state governments have responded by setting up emergency food and shelters, food distribution centers and shelters. I know that in the state of Maharashtra itself, more than 5,000 such food distribution centers have been set up to help the migrant workers. Typically, the migrant workers come from the north or east of India, and they tend to be a higher proportion in states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, even Tamil Nadu and Kerala in the southern states. But stepping back a little bit, if you look at the industrial sector, actually, even before the pandemic, India's industrial growth was somewhat muted. It was slowing down. In particular, if I just say focus on passenger vehicles, say one particular sector like automobiles, you can see that in the last financial year, if you look at across the broad spectrum, whether it's passenger vehicles, two-wheelers, trucks, or tractors, it was degrowth. It was -18 to -40%, and that situation has just got aggravated because of the pandemic and the shutdown. Of course, the reasons might be many. Some people think it's because of the new emission norms. Some people think because of the new, GST and and so on. So we don't need to go into that right now. But essentially, so how has at least the industrial sector, the formal sector, responded? I can relate some experience from our own group. So as you know, we are in the industries like chemicals, metals, cement, and textiles, which are in the manufacturing sector. We have more than about 35-40 units producing cement all over the country. But that, because of the shutdown, there's no production of cement. And even if we did produce, it's very difficult to store it. It has to be evacuated. But since the logistics and trucking is stopped and many construction activities have been stopped, there's no point. But we have been providing our workers with amenities, especially even contract workers. There's been distribution of food on a daily basis. And of course, all the other practice of social distancing and isolation or sanitization has been going on. As far as our chemical units are concerned, since many of the output that we produce is used for sanitization or disinfectants and cleaning agents, so some production of our chemicals is continuing, and it's about maybe 20-30%. And metal production also is functioning, but there too it's close. The worker colonies are close by, so there it is fairly not disrupted as much. But speaking of industry at large or worker, the state of workers at large, I think the situation is very serious. I must also remind that of the 490 million workers in India, more than half are in agriculture. and agriculture is a purely entrepreneurial activity. In fact, 1/3 of India's agriculture, or maybe 40%, depends on farm labor, depends on tenants, meaning these are workers actually, and these are typically workers who migrate to cities or construction sites in the lean season, and when it is harvest time or sowing season, they go back to the farms or villages, and their mobility is very important. So one of the big challenges in the shutdown has been mobility of workers, migrant workforce back and forth, and this has become a real challenge, and I think the governments are trying to find a solution to that. So I mean, I'll just conclude by saying that I'm referring to a World Bank report on South Asia, especially South Asian labor, that it's been a big challenge to ensure a large growth in employment, because the challenge of development in South Asia or countries like India is that we need to generate something like maybe 10 to 12 million new jobs every year, and these jobs have to be progressively be higher quality, better paying, more productive, and therefore they require skilling and other inputs. But for various reasons, and now of course with slower growth, it's going to be a big challenge. But I remember the line that that struck me the most from that World Bank report on labor, condition of labor, that we have to move to a regime. We have to move to a labor law regulation regime where we protect workers and not jobs. That is to say, we have to have a social security system, which I said, like, which provides health, retirement, and unemployment benefits to workers, but not necessarily to jobs. There's a McKinsey report which says that more than 68% of India's manufacturing jobs are vulnerable or are in danger of getting replaced by automation or some kind of automation. So actually the workers and the new labor force entrants have to be ready for jobs of tomorrow. But the focus of policy should be to progressively move towards labor laws and regulation and support, where we try to support workers and not jobs. And that, I think, fundamentally responsibility lies with the state. Of course, the corporate sector and employers can contribute, but really the framework has to be in play. I mean, basically the responsibility and execution lies with the state. To repeat, it's about health benefits and retirement benefits and unemployment insurance. Health is important because for people who are even above the poverty line, for families, even one health episode can put the family into the poverty if it's not supported by the state. Any out-of-pocket private expenses on health can be debilitating, devastating for the family. That's why it's important that there's some state support. So, Mr. Steinruecke, I think I'll stop here and maybe take questions later on. Thank you.
Sure, Dr. Ranade. Thank you so much for that very comprehensive introduction. And maybe just one food for thought. One of the greatest employment generation in the last years in India was the IT industry, where from basically nothing, millions of jobs were generated. Right. And that is a master example how India became a world champion in IT. Therefore, probably one of the solutions for the problems now with the migrant laborers could come from IT. Because today, when you look at it, we have the Aadhaar card. Everyone has an Aadhaar card. The biggest problem with the migrant laborers is A, you don't know where they are. B, you don't know what they are equipped or skilled with. And therefore, maybe if one were to sort of improve the Aadhaar card with skills, and now we also have the Yogya Setu, which is that mobile phone where basically people are tracked and traced with regard to the coronavirus, like they have it in China everywhere. In China, you can't move without that phone, and if you're not green, you have a problem. That will also come in Germany. It will come all over the world. Now, if one were to combine the Aadhaar card plus the skills of the migrant laborers plus that mobile gadget, then one would probably know which migrant laborer is where, with which kind of quality, so that the companies who need them can basically get them. I don't know whether Nandan Nilekani will work on that, but that's a different story. Just one food for thought. Okay, now we come to the first company case, which is Bayer Group in India, and Simon Thorsten Wiebusch, the Chief Operating Officer of Crop Science Division of Bayer for India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, is going to make his presentation for 10 minutes. Please.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Steinruecke. Thank you, everybody, for being on the webcast here. Let me start with expressing that this is really an unprecedented scenario which nobody really had on their plate. And what I will be focusing on is a little bit the, may I say, it humbles us and honors us that we are regarded as essential commodity supplier in terms of being active in the agricultural and pharmaceutical sphere as Bayer. That is, yeah, both a blessing, but it brings challenges with it because ultimately we are asked to function in an environment where a lot of things don't function. So maybe starting out, giving you a little bit of an idea of the footprint of the company, we have more than 12,000 employees directly and indirectly related to us, and this does not yet include what was referred to before, the unorganized sector, which is in agriculture, where you have people helping you in seed production, etc. So you see the company as such has quite a workforce to try to keep going, and it's all over the country. Which in many ways is a blessing because you can operate out of different areas, especially when you find that certain states and cities are locked down. But you can imagine coordinating across makes it that much more complicated. I will specifically focus on the agricultural area, but if there's questions later on also a little bit more to the pharmaceutical side, I will at least try to give some answers on that as well. Now, what it all boils down to is that when you deal with such a, as they call it, black swan event, communication is key. And when you have such a vast operation, basically the crisis management team that you put in place is essential to keeping things up and running. And keeping things up and running is a different challenge than in normal times. Very often, when you look at normal operations, you will be discussing the performance of workers, the performance of the company. You look at safety in a completely different scope. How do you avoid accidents? Today, you literally need to sit there and say, how do you keep people safe? But also, how do you instill the comfort that they are safe? And that second part is actually the most difficult one. While having SOPs in place and saying, okay, the plant can operate, it can operate at whatever it is, even only 30%, because that's what the government allows. That by far does not mean that your workers will happily be coming and working there if they do not feel comforted that they are safe. And you very often forget how much of a infrastructure and informal infrastructure is around. So where do the people get their transport? So how do they come to the company? Yeah, there's no rickshaws driving, for example. How do they get food if you don't have a canteen, or if the canteen is not allowed to operate? So ultimately, it's all about communication, and very often just, if I may call it so, ensuring the basics being in place. Now, what we have really gone into is trying to identify and communicate success stories. So we're using each and every tool that you could think of. Is it WhatsApp? Is it the internal intranet? Is it literally Zoom and all these coming up and coming, you might say so, communication opportunities to stay in touch and keep people not just engaged, but keep people feeling that the organization is still functioning. So we've had the typical leadership messages, but what is more important is to highlight what individuals are doing. So we're taking up what we call buyer heroes, where people are feeding the migrant laborers as well, because yes, there's a government infrastructure, but it doesn't necessarily come to everybody, or some people do not want to go to these central kitchens. They literally stay around our production plants because there they know that they get food from the workers there. A lot of leadership messaging going through and literally ensuring that people have the opportunity to speak up and express their fears in this context. You do also contribute to the government funds. So basically what we've done as a whole, the company had the 1-day salary, which is then upped by the company. And we do this because it instills pride in the organization, and it gives everybody the feeling that they can do something. What is interesting right now is that the protective equipment, literally simply face masks, are things which are so important to instill that degree of trust. So what we find is when we open up a warehouse, for example, very often, first thing we need to do is give face masks and protective equipment to the police, which will then help us to administer workers coming into the plant. Now, summing it up, it's all about safety. It is realizing that literally the virus has put focus on the frontline worker much more than in the normal day-to-day operations we would be sensing this, ensuring that we keep the customers in mind, enabling the business continuity, which is twofold important. Being an essential commodity provider is a privilege to be allowed to operate, but it is as well an obligation that we do this to the expectation, which means there is a lot of focus also by government on watching that what we do is really feeding the essentials of this country. Personal well-being, absolutely as well important, and this is where people sitting at home and very often not in the most comfortable of places are doing whatever it is, yoga classes on Zoom and things as a community, and we find this is really working out very well to keep the community active. With this, I would like to close and thank you for the opportunity to present a little bit what Bayer is doing in this crisis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wiebusch, for that insight. And indeed, it's remarkable to see how Bayer over the years has developed in India and how critical their business is and how deep they go into the rural area and how well they know what is happening on the ground. The next speaker, if I get it right here, is Pradeep Parameswaran. He is the president of Uber in India and South Asia. And of course, Uber, everybody knows in India, that is self-understood. Of course, at the moment, also Uber cannot function properly. And Uber is, of course, a company that has sort of started or co-invented the gig economy, which is an economy that is on demand. And to a certain extent, it's a business with, if you wish, migrant laborers, or with informal sector. Everybody is a sort of entrepreneur, and through the internet, they can be on demand. They are in a special situation with COVID-19, and therefore we're interested in your response. Pradeep, please.
Thank you, Mr. Steinruecke. Am I audible?
Yes, very much.
Thank you so much. So if you wouldn't mind just going to the next slide. I just thought I will take the next 10 minutes or so to talk a little bit about the situation today. I was listening very carefully to Mr. Rande's conversation and the points that he very eloquently made about the state of the unorganized workforce. And in the way that this word has been developed and used, which is gig economy, it's kind of the halfway stage between kind of fully formalized. They're not fully formalized yet, and in that they are mostly entrepreneurial, but equally they are not unorganized, right? Many of them pay taxes. All of the money flow goes through very well accounted, documented systems. They are part of kind of the formal economy from a payment standpoint. So there are many things that are very different for the gig economy workers versus the traditional unorganized sector. So just to give a little bit of perspective, if you think about kind of the biggest gig economy companies today, whether that's the ride sharing companies like Ola and Uber, the delivery companies like Swiggy and Zomato, you can think about the delivery support workforce for the e-commerce companies, the urban services companies like UrbanClap. Many of these together today actually provide opportunities for more than 3 million workers, which is a staggering number, if you think about the fact that virtually none of this existed, 6-7 years back. And overall has been part of this journey of transition from kind of the unorganized to the organized. That's true for the workers. It's equally true for the services. So the same auto ride for whom you would know anything about the driver, their background, not have the safety features, not have digital payments, are all kind of moving away from the unorganized to the organized sector. I think it's happening in transport. Equally, it's happening in many other sectors in India. If you go to the next slide, I want to spend a minute talking about who are the partners that are on our platform. And given the focus of this conversation, particularly around migrant workers, we have on an active basis in any given month, pre-COVID, nearly 500,000 drivers on our platform. Majority of them actually are migrants, and 70% of them are migrants that come from small towns which are typically attached to big urban areas. So in the outskirts of the Bombays, the Bangalores, the Delhis and the Hyderabad's. And then we have a few pockets from the traditional labor delivering states, which is UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, etc., where we have people who travel longer distances, but typically they are migrants. Many of them have a very specific skill around driving, and they learn technology working with us, which is that now, thanks to telecom service providers and the cost of smartphones coming down, they have devices. We work with them to make sure that they are able to use it, and they combine the knowledge of technology along with their driving skills to create livelihood opportunities for themselves. Many of them actually live by themselves while the family is back in their villages, and typically they are the single earning member of the family, which means that they are sending money back every month. So all of this to say that in a situation where transport is virtually shut down, if you go to the next slide, it has been a very tough last few weeks for the sector and particularly for these workers. So virtually earnings have dropped to zero. This is for people transport. But even for e-commerce companies where it has been limited to essential goods delivery, as well as the food companies, given the fear of prepared food outside as well as infections, food delivery volumes have also dropped a lot. Collectively, the 3 million plus gig workforce has not had access to what would be normal earnings levels. In fact, far from that. So the situation actually has been quite tough, not just for them, but also for the company, where we have gone to basically zero revenue. Thanks for going to the next slide. So what have we been up to over the last 5 weeks? Most of our response in this environment has been only focused on 3 things. First, building on what we do well, how do we ensure that we can leverage our technology and ground operations knowledge to move what matters? And we have set up 3 separate services that are about, in a limited fashion, moving what actually matters in society today. So we've launched a service called Uber Medic, which is cars that are going through much more stringent standards around disinfection and practices around safety, which is used to transport frontline health workers. So these are now attached to many government and private hospitals and are being used for transportation of healthcare workers. That's number one. Number two, we have launched a service by the name of Uber Delivery, which is partnering with the Big Baskets, the Spencers, the Big Bazaars of the world, as well as Flipkart, to move last mile essential services. And supply chains are particularly broken, and goods are not getting through to the end customer. So we have set up last mile delivery services. And lastly, we are focused on essential transport. What I mean by that is there are people who still need to get around cities, and without public transport, and for folks who don't have access to private vehicles, if you need to take your parents for a dialysis, if you need to go to somebody's house to take care of someone, a relative or a friend, if you need to move things, go buy groceries, and if you don't have access to shops that are nearby, there is still need for essential transport. And many states are waking up to the reality that that provision has not been made, and the government is opening up those permissions also in a slightly slow manner. But I think the most important thing that we've been focused on really is the last part of it, which is how do we support earners at a time when our revenue is zero? Equally, their opportunities to earn a living has also come down. And to that end, we have actually been busy deploying our own capital, if you go to the next slide, as well as raising capital. And I want to spend a minute talking about what is it that we have been doing. First and foremost, we have a very generous COVID assistance policy, which is an insurance type of product, where if somebody, any of our driver partners contracts the disease and is out of the workforce, there is insurance that supports them. That is being done as a particular benefit given the specific nature of the issue we are facing. Secondly, we have seeded with our own corpus 25 crores, a little bit north of $3 million. And these 25 crores have been deployed to provide more than 70,000 driver partners a one-time grant. It's a grant, it's not a loan. It's money that is meant to help them tide over the lockdown period, under the assumption the lockdown would be kind of 3 to 4 weeks. That makes sure that the driver partner can put bread on the table for their family and provide for their basic needs. In addition, we have started to raise capital, and I think the visual is a little bit dated. We have raised over $1 million. The total corpus that we are up is now around 32, 33 crores. My expectation is that the collective capital can provide for more than 100,000 driver partners as a one-time relief. Having said that, I go back to what Dr. Anande talked about, which is it is very much the case that we realize that it is what we are doing is not going to be enough to cover all of the folks, right? And so while we are doing as a private entity in the context of our economics being the way it is, as much as we can do, I do think this crisis is truly showing the importance of having a social net for this kind of a workforce. So I may selfishly, to be honest, on the behalf of my partners, make an ask for folks who are listening in to go to our fundraise page, and if there are institutions that are looking to support migrant laborers, we would love to find a way to get your help. Rest assured, this is fully auditable, direct bank transfers that go into the accounts of the driver partners, given that we have an electronic banking relationship with all of them. But equally, I think we have to think about how we partner with governments to put more institutional mechanisms into place to deal with extremely extraordinary circumstances of the nature that we are facing now. Again, with that, I will wrap up. Again, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to come and talk to this audience.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Parameswaran. Uber is certainly a very interesting example how new economy can be extremely successful. Uber is one of the most successful startups globally, as we all know. But on the other hand, in such a situation, even such an outstanding example can have huge problems. Interestingly enough, because Later, we are also going to talk a little bit about German companies are doing in India. Christian Frese, he was the man who started Uber in India. And prior to that, he was running Uber in Germany, just to give you a little idea of how the links are there sometimes. Now we come to Chandan Kumar. He is coordinator Working People's Charter, and he's now going to give us our next presentation, the situation of workers in India. Mr. Kumar, 10 minutes, the floor is yours.
Yes, first of all, thank you so much. Am I audible? Is it okay? Yeah?
Absolutely.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much to the moderator for giving me the floor. And I have been hearing all my fellow speakers and they spoke very, very profoundly and very, very well. I'm grateful to them. So the situation here, I think I'm sort of mismatched in the panel because I'm one of those people who have been ground since the lockdown announced on 22nd of March. And I have been, I'm not sort of joining and speaking in such webinar space. So yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. I will speak more about my ground level experience, what we have been seeing, what we have been, facing on the ground. So just very quickly, who we are the collective of the informal workers organizations across the country, and almost 150 provincial, local, and informal workers organizations, including activists, workers leader, and academia. We have a presence in over 13 states. And we have been sort of responding at this moment almost 16 states as far as the COVID relief is concerned. So our response have been in the 5 folds. What we are doing, we are actually responding SOS calls and the distress calls coming from the migrant workers and the daily wage workers in 16 states. And we have actually set up kind of the informal helpline, labor helpline, and where we are responding to the large number of workforce. And our efforts have been in reaching it out to providing dry ration to the workers, because the food security has become the big question. And we know that across the country that how the demand for the workers is basically coming it up, particularly for the food and the basic essentials. Second thing is about we are making a kind of a suggestions to the central government, and a lot of our suggestions is also basically incorporated by the central government, COVID-19 response. So we have been writing to the COVID-19 Economic Task Force team, and we are asking that what needs to be done. A lot of our demands are included, but unfortunately, those demands are not really practical enough on the ground. To give you a small example, the construction workers cess fund. There is a construction workers welfare board. There's millions of rupees is lying with the construction workers welfare fund, but those money have not been able to access by the migrant workers because they do not have workers welfare card or any ID card, or their bank accounts are not linked with their welfare board, and that's the whole problem. So large number of schemes, large number of the schemes basically announced by the government, state government, and central government, they have been really struggling to get them access. Again, the whole questions about the food security. Large number of these migrant workers do not have the PDS card, what we call the ration card, and therefore they cannot access. So large number of the NGOs or civil society or the trade unions, they have been trying to help it out, like all of us, but yet these efforts are very minuscule, because we cannot deal with the 100 million numbers, as rightly pointed out by my colleague from the Aditya Birla group. So the whole problem is that whatever government is announcing is actually not reaching on the ground, because it seems that there's a situation where the millions of people are stateless. Government have no record about what they do, which area they work in, what sectors they work in, what kind of wages they get. Already my fellow speakers talked about it, that majority of the workers, they do not have any written contracts. So that's the whole problem, that neither the state nor the local labor department have any clue about these working population. And one of the most critical question I would really like to raise it, because we have been, and our friends is basically going to the industrial pockets in the different part of the country. And you see that the government have announced on 20th of March that all the employers on all the industries basically cannot withhold the wages or cannot deduct the payment of wages or have to give the minimum wages and whatever the wages they are entitled to get. However, you go to the industrial pockets. I myself have been visiting industrial pockets, and the contractors are sort of disappeared. The factory owners are basically absolutely disappeared. They're not responding to the workers' call, and workers are in kind of totally super distressed situation. Some of the examples we have seen that in Surat, in Delhi, in Pune, some of the areas where the workers came on the street. So we are in the situation is I think we are heading toward the social unrest. We are heading towards the famine, where I completely suspect, I'm afraid about that we'll see the starvation deaths. And even though there is a almost like a one month of the lockdown, yet government have not taken a very concrete measures on the ground. And there are so many bad news is coming. You see what happened in Supreme Court yesterday. There's a big group called the Nagarik Exports is going to Supreme Court and asking and challenging government order to pay the wages. And now the Supreme Court is saying that, okay, let the government respond, and all the matters being adjourned. So all the effort, even the government orders are being challenged in the Supreme Court. And there is a whole kind of hostility by the employers for not paying the minimum wages. I think it's a very, very worrisome situation. I think at this moment, what I would definitely like to talk about, that the situation we are in right now, where we have no idea about when the lockdown is going to be open. At this moment, large number of workers are getting, completely in the stressful situation to go back home. Yesterday, Honorable Prime Minister announced that red zones area, their lockdown period may get extended. So we are seeing the massive chaos at this situation. Let me quickly just go through the couple of slides as far as my presentation is concerned, because I realized after listening to fellow speakers to speak to my own grassroots and ground level situation, which is more important than the going on the kind of data and perspective, because my fellow speakers have already talked about it. So let me quickly go to the slide number 3. If you see, can you go next slide, please? Yeah, next slide. Yes. So if you see the manufacturing industry, which is recording the year-on contraction, the output, and industrial production such as automobile, paper, furniture, fabricated metal products is actually going down. 2019, it was 16.2%, and now it's 2020, 15.3%. So I don't know what is the government plan is basically is going to increase the share as far as the GDP growth is concerned, where the Prime Minister has said that Make in India, we're aiming to increase the sector's GDP share by 25%, but it is on decline. So you understand this, what is the situation. Please go to the next slide, please. Yes, next slide. Yes. This is one of the most important data I would like to highlight. The manufacturing industries were hiring more informal workers and on short-term contracts. And if you see the data, this is a government data I'm quoting, the contract workers from 20% in 2001 to 38%. So you see the very sharp increase in the number of hiring the contract workers on the short-term contracts. So this is again the very, very disturbing data. And again, the female labor force participation, you see from the 42% to 26%. So how the labor market is getting so hostile towards the women workers, and in terms of how they're encouraging the informality, the entire industry. Go to the next slide, please. Yeah. Next slide. Yes. So this is one of the things which is again very, very disturbing, that 633 lakhs incorporated non-agriculture SMEs, MSMEs, sorry. And you see that even what government have announced recently, that they will be give the kind of the loan, the credit loan, but these loans are not for the wage subsistence. These loans are mainly for the utility charges and the raw materials. So you are expecting an industry which already have a very, very small capital. We do not have any kind of strength to pay the wages, and then you are expecting them to kind of loan you are offering, or kind of asking them to pay. It is absolutely impossible agenda. So we have written to the government a couple of times, like 3 letters that we have written, that please, announce some subsidy. I mean, Canada has announced $82 billion. This is my information I read in the newspaper. But as far as India is concerned, there is not any kind of concrete policy measures in terms of announcement to provide the relief to the MSMEs. So this is one of the most worrisome data. Can you go on the next slide, please? So one other thing I would like to highlight that the government has announced Pradhan Mantri Mudra Loan Yojana, and where the government have said that let's formalize the MSME sector. However, if you see the data that almost 59 million registered loan accounts under the Mudra Loan Yojana, 86% had got less than 50,000 rupees to start a business. So can you believe, can you expect that the overall industry, even the Mudra loan, can benefit or can provide any support to this sector? Absolutely not. Even you see that for the initial investment, it requires at least 10 to 15 lakhs rupees. And this also giving a huge space to increasing the NPA, because a lot of this Mudra loan is given to the workers and there is no guarantee. There's no kind of assurance that these money will get back to the bank. And you see that there's a huge NPA risk is basically bank is dealing with that. Next slide, please. I just wrap it up in 1 minute. Next slide, please. Yes. So this is another thing which I would like to highlight is the wage disparity question between regular workers and the contract workers. So already there's a huge wage gap, like almost 150 to 250 rupees across sectors. And at this situation, one of my fellow speakers talked about the whole production system in the last 1 month. Yet the industry must have some kind of very concrete capital to provide the wages. I suspect that if these workers will not get any wages, they may go back and they may come back also. But the whole situation is that if they go back, they won't have enough resources to survive. So what exactly the government plan? I'm not only putting the entire responsibility on the industry, also on the state accountability towards that. And if they do not ensure the wages, I completely suspect that there will be a complete chaos. We have been demanding on the district level that there has to be a dedicated task force where there will be labor department, industrial people, the municipal authority, at least to go and ensure we have the health emergency. We have the law called Disaster Management Act 2005, where the state can take an unprecedented decision where they can say that yes, we need a dedicated task force which makes sure that these workers are paid wages, but it is not happening. This has been our continuous demand, but it is not happening at all. Next slide, please. I'm just wrapping up in the last slide. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, next slide. Go ahead. I'm just wrapping up. Next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, go ahead. Next slide. I'm just yeah, next slide. Yeah. Yes. So this is one of the most important question that Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, which was part of the government big announcement that the people who have a Jan Dhan account will get the 500 rupees. And you see that large number of people have not received this money because there's only 31% registered accounts had a privilege of maintaining zero balance. So technically, over 70% accounts are basically completely dismantled. It's shut down. So this is one of the example that why government schemes are not reaching to the working poor, because whatever schemes they were part of that or were part of the government announcement, it was not really functioned very well, and for a number of reasons. I don't want to go into the reason, but I'm just telling you the reality that why the government schemes are not reaching out to the people. So in the last slide, please go ahead, and I would like to wrap up with saying that particularly focusing on the MSMEs and related sectors, that there is a need for the liquidity, and if government and industry do not come together and they do not announce any big package in order to make sure that there's a wage protection for these workers, there will be a lot of problem. Also, we need a kind of very concrete policy measures where we need to prevent mass unemployment, which is already happening at this moment, and how we can actually improve the consumer sentiment. So these are kind of linked issue where we need to really kind of focus upon, and industry, government, and trade unions must come together on an urgent manner to think about some concrete policy measures to protect it. In the last, I would say that, my colleagues from Uber, my colleagues from Aditya Birla also spoke about that. I'm not sure if these big companies have paid the salary to the MSMEs, or even for the Uber company, such a big billion-dollar company, do they have any kind of capacity? Because we know they have a big capital. Can they actually provide like a 2 months of the wages to these workers? I appreciate that their announcements about the health security and etc. But at this moment, industry have to really use their working capital to secure their social security and the wage protection. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chandan Kumar. This is indeed a very interesting insight in ground reality. It looks very dicey. And of course, if these migrant laborers do not get anything to eat and no work and nothing, then it's going to be dangerous. And that is why this has to be avoided. We now come to our last speaker, which is Priya Naik. She is the CEO and founder of Samhita Social Ventures, who is our partner in this seminar here, and she is talking about supporting your employees in times of crisis. And Priya, the floor is yours, 10 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Firstly, very grateful to the Indo-German Chamber of Commerce for setting this up, and to all the speakers who went before me, and to all of you who are listening in. So we've had an interesting few weeks, and I fully take Chandan's point to say that the government has responded, but it's really not reaching the people who need it the most. What we've seen is a couple of solutions, which I'm hoping to talk to you about today. Give me a minute to move these slides. So Samhita is a 10-year-old organization. It was really set up to solve wicked problems, and clearly COVID is one such wicked problem. The speakers before me have talked about just what our workers have gone through, and therefore I will skip that. As we talk to companies, this is what we're hearing, right? One is that companies themselves are extremely resource crunched. Right? There just isn't enough cash available, and whatever cash is available is being conserved because none of us really know how this lockdown is going to play out. And so given that one needs to balance priorities between continuing business and looking after one's workforce and stakeholders, our recommendation really is to be as creative and collaborative as possible. This is really the time to respond to the needs of our workers and our sort of laborers. And companies need to do everything that they can to remove the bottlenecks and really leverage the schemes that the government has offered. We have a few solutions for that, but really, this is a time to step up and show support in a way that you're being creative in terms of how you're using resources. So in the last few weeks, we've seen an amazing set of collaborations take place between industries, within industries, also between industry and government. And really, at a time like this, when resources are scarce, the problems are really very, very large and complex. This is really the time to come together. So in the last few weeks, we've set up two alliances. It's spent a little more time on the Indian Workers Alliance. It was meant to respond to the migrant workers and blue-collar workers who've lost their livelihoods. And we've really divided our response between two phases. The first is the immediate response phase, where everyone who talked to you about just ensuring survival of workers, that's really the issue that we're responding to. And we're doing two things. One is digital cash transfers, and we've partnered with an organization called Super Money, which has access to 3.5 lakh migrant workers' accounts. And so we're able to transfer the cash within an hour or so. Digital cash transfers are also recommended by economists and experts globally. My former bosses, Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo, who won the Nobel this year, have been talking about it in the last few weeks as well. It really ensures that money gets into the bank accounts of people who need it the most. It's transparent, it's quick. The second is really the linkage to government schemes that Chandan talked about. Yes, both state and central government have announced a lot of these, but the reality is most people are not able to access it. And so we're ensuring that they get access to whatever they're eligible for. In the second phase, we will be focusing a lot on reskilling, upskilling, but also ensuring that people have access to jobs if they have lost them right now, or access to alternative livelihood opportunities while they're able to regain their former employment. And for that, we're also facilitating a series of microloans, because honestly, digital cash transfers are only going to go that far. And so another product that we're coming up with is almost a returnable grant, with the expectation that if someone held a job and is likely to hold another job, if we're able to support the reskilling and re-employment process, then all we need to do is to provide enough money for 3 to 6 months for them to get through the crisis. But once they are back and once they are earning, hopefully they have the ability to return this loan. I think the success that we've really seen across each of these solutions has been when we've co-created this with industry, because it is CEOs of companies who understand their stakeholder and their industry better than anyone else, and really leaning on them to co-create these solutions has really been very, very powerful. I'm sorry, is it possible to just go back 2 slides? So Pradeep has talked about the work that we're doing with Uber. It's very simple. It's 3,000 rupees being transferred to each driver. It gets into the bank accounts. They receive money fairly quickly. They can buy what they need. Today, we have no idea what they need to spend money on. It's food, it's rent. Do they need to send it back to their families? And like I said, it is recommended by global experts. And then the next phase of this will ideally be to provide returnable grants to incentivize people to come back to work. The other solution that we are working with has really come from a large industrial house. They have large factories across India. But what we are doing is taking 2 cities and systematically mapping companies that will experience a slowdown and therefore will have to let go of workers over the next few months. But in the same city happen to be other companies that will experience a boom and will want to recruit a set of workers fairly quickly. What we are doing is really partnering with a large skilling company, along with NSDC, as well as a financial institution, to systematically map job losses from one industry and ensure that similar skill sets that are available in industries that are recruiting, that we're sort of figuring out that match and ensuring that workers from one industry are trained at scale to find jobs in other industries. And in the 6 months that it takes to ensure that transition, we are providing some money to allow for subsistence and then other money that they can spend on their own skilling and employment. And we believe that actually the number of 3x is underreported. We think we will see a significant leverage in that number. Just this morning, we spoke to a couple of donors who are really coming together to set up this revolving fund mechanism. The way it works is that philanthropic donors really take the first loss default guarantee. Chandan talked about the fact that there is a worry that some of these grants, returnable grants, cannot be paid back, and that's really the risk that the philanthropic donors are putting in. The way this facility will work is a third of the money will come from industries that will let go of their employees, and instead of just telling them, look, we're letting you go, they're actually providing a little bit of money to ensure their sustenance and their reskilling. A third of the money will come from companies that are looking to recruit these workers, and a third of money will come from donors and other financial institutions. Another interesting collaboration that we're beginning to put together, again going back to Chandan's point, is that 38,000 crores of money is available in government cesspools. This was collected by the government from construction companies. And a large proportion of construction workers, while they're eligible for a lot of the benefits you see on the screen, really don't have access to it because they just haven't filled out the paperwork to get this card in these schemes. So what we are doing is actually tying up with a large private equity fund, which is pooling in money from other investors. And that money sort of sits and contributes 250 rupees to unlock 500, to unlock a series of benefits for construction workers. The balance 250 comes from real estate companies. And really this solution came up for 2 reasons. One is, unlike the previous models, real estate companies are going through a very significant cash crunch, and therefore don't really have the resources to look after a very, very large number of construction workers that are currently going through a crisis. But simultaneously, the government has announced a lot of these benefits. So really, with a small contribution, unlocking a large-ish sum of money that is available for construction workers. The other advantage in this model is this encourages best practices from the get-go. We are really insisting that, and this is being done by the private equity fund, where as part of ESG compliance, they are requiring every single real estate company to ensure that every construction worker on every site has access to the BOCW card, which will give them access to government support now as well as in the next few years. Can we go to the next slide? So just to spend a minute on the execution of it. Everything we do, we are doing in close collaboration with industry partners, with execution partners and the government. And really our role is to ensure that we hold this all together. It's transparent, it's efficient, it functions at scale. Just the problems are so enormous. The number of people we're all trying to serve collectively is so large that all of this needs to happen at a level of scale. We're also putting in a fairly robust technology platform to ensure that we're constantly generating data and insights, which allows us to then do more advocacy with the government or go back to employers who have a better sense of what their workers are experiencing, and we're able to craft a smarter, more effective response from everyone involved. What we're also doing in this time is really bringing together various networks. So we're talking to folks like UNDP to ensure that we really leverage the kind of knowledge partnership they have in India and globally, and really celebrate corporate leaders who at times of extreme crisis are still stepping up and looking after not just their immediate, but their extended workforce. And therefore ensure that if we're able to celebrate and recognize some of this work, that those good practices will continue over a period of time. The second is really to make the government a core partner. It's not that the government doesn't have the intent, but really creating mechanisms to facilitate the partnership from the get-go. Give them the data to tell them where they're failing, but also show them execution success wherever possible. The third is really leveraging all of the networks that companies have. I mean, a company like Uber, for example, has the ability to bring in a lot of their business partners to the table to really form an alliance. And therefore, working systematically across multiple industries, we're creating a consortium of business partners who all are vested in supporting India's workers. And the last and really the most important is to constantly communicate to our workers to say that given that they have served us, for all of these years, that it's our time to step up and really have their back. I just want to end with one last thing that we're doing, which is while I talked about the India Workers Alliance, we're also putting together an India Protectors Alliance, which is really focused on our police force, sanitation workers, and frontline healthcare workers, because unless they are able to do their work and they're safe, the rest of us can't go back to work. So we're being as smart as possible, even within this framework. So really partnering extensively with the government, with folks like the Gates Foundation, as well as large FMCG companies to really go out and not just educate people on safer sanitation practices, but unlock a very significant amount of money to protect our protectors, but also really build out India's healthcare ecosystem. Because it's at a time like this that we realize that all of us are going through a tremendous amount of inconvenience because our healthcare system is not able to respond. Really, the last thing I want to say is, across everything that we've done, we've tried to leverage resources that are available across multiple stakeholders. We are building alliances very, very quickly and ensuring that partners who traditionally would not work with each other are incentivized to come together. And really, lastly, trying to create as much leverage and an impact multiplier mechanism to drive more resources. To give you one example, I know that a lot of you have bought PPEs and donated it to the government. The reality is the government has money. And really the issue there is the fact that there is no working capital available for the small manufacturers who are supplying these PPEs. So we're telling our corporate partners, instead of buying PPEs, just put money in a working capital fund, because you're able to unlock 10 to 20 times the quantum of PPEs, literally just by addressing a working capital gap. It's really simple, but very powerful. With that, thanks a lot. I hope I was able to give you a few solutions and a few conversations that we're a part of. Would love to work with you to co-create solutions that are relevant for your stakeholders and your industry and your company.
Yeah, thank you very much, Priya. Indeed, that was a lot of information. All the speakers gave a lot of information, and now we have only about 10 minutes left for question and answers. So this is another challenge. And I know that Dr. Ranade has to leave a little earlier. So therefore, maybe to him, the first question, which we got here from the audience. And one of the questions is whether there are some industries in India due to the COVID crisis who are not so bad off. Is there anybody left who can still sort of be a beneficiary in this crisis, or is everybody in the same boat and down?
Well, Mr. Steinruecke, actually, as you know, something like 25% of the economy is still working, and as we progressively go towards the relaxation of the lockdown, more and more sectors of the economy will function. But certainly, government services, healthcare, I guess even pharma, or the what are called the essential services and industries are working. And even, for example, to give an extreme example, coal mining. Coal is an essential commodity because it's used to produce electricity. So coal mining is happening in the country, and coal mine workers are getting paid. Just to give you an example. So it's not as if all the workers are suddenly affected with zero income and zero jobs and so on. The most vulnerable workers are, of course, who are in the informal sector, who are migrants, who are in the cities, and who actually have livelihoods where they depend on daily wage earning, and who actually have been affected because a lot of the services which are sort of non-essential have been affected. Their incomes have been affected. But that is not to say that the large class of workers, agriculture, currently it's the harvest season for the spring harvest time. So they are getting, the workers are busy there. Of course, there's some farm labor shortage, but that's also being addressed. So there are sectors of the economy which are functioning and workers are getting paid.
Right. Yeah, thank you. For Mr. Wiebusch, the question that we have is, how does German headquarters support their companies in India? You know that in Germany we have the Kurzarbeitergeld, which is short workers' money, where basically if someone doesn't have work, the government is paying the salary up to 80% so that the companies do not have to basically let the workers go, so that they are still there when the economy comes back. Now, this kind of system we do not have in India. So when your workers at Bayer don't have any work, are you getting money from Bayer in Germany?
Well, actually, it links to the answer that was given just now. I mean, being an essential commodity provider, we can actually function. That doesn't mean that we benefit out of the crisis. I want to make this very clear. But at least we can function, and with that, people continue to stay busy. And the commitment has been to continue to pay salaries, even in some cases when we have drivers and people, where we say we pay twice a month, or we try to help them through the crisis a bit more, where we know that they are cash crunched. So to a certain degree, this is a decision which is made in India. The company in India is actually listed on the stock exchange here and owned by Indian stockholders. So in that sense, the German headquarter would be the last payer of resort, if you like. But luckily enough, this is not a necessity. But what is important is the moral support, which is absolutely there to say, guys, safety first. Keep guys safe. Keep your people on the payroll. So there's a clear no fire statement coming through. Although again, as I say, it's not a situation where we would even have to think of it in India at this point. What is important is to keep people comfortable in this context, and I think this is where we get all the comfort from Germany as well to continue to do that. So we're in that sense a lucky company.
Yeah, thank you very much. By the way, those of you who don't know Bayer that well, today Bayer, for the first time in its history, has an AGM fully digital. Never happened before, and it's one of the first German companies, multinational, that has a fully digital AGM. Of course, more will follow, and that is actually one of the positive outcomes, I would say, from this coronavirus, that now a lot more things are going digital, a lot of more efficiency, people do not have to drive, etc. So it's an interesting development. There's one question now for Mr. Parameswaran from Uber, and this is basically whether after the lifting of the lockdown, do you think people will use Uber as before? Or will there be any special measures with regard to the safety of the driver and the customer? Maybe only one driver in the car, and how does that work? That's the first question. But the second question I would like to add is that, and I mentioned in the beginning, I mean, Uber is basically a digital company. It brings people to people with modern technology. And you, having worked for McKinsey and Hindustan Lever, so you're basically a marketing expert and also an analyst. I mean, how is it possible that the situation with the migrant laborers in India can be maybe solved with modern IT technology? I asked that question in the very beginning, but maybe you can refer to that also, because when we see how Uber and others have come from nowhere and created $1 billion industry, maybe something like that could now also happen with the migrant laborers, and maybe then we can take COVID public one day.
Happy to take both questions, and thank you for the opportunity again. One, I think the question on safety, I think, is one of the most important questions that we are grappling with as we speak, because we fully understand that the standards and the expectations and the responsibility that we carry in the post-COVID world is definitely quite different from pre-COVID. In fact, there's an interesting German connection that I'll come to here in a second. We have actually been doing a fair amount of consumer insights work over the last 4 weeks with both drivers and riders, and both of them have concerns around safety. So the question around will ride sharing increase or decrease, I think that is a little bit of a crystal ball question, and I would not hazard a guess. What I would say is that on one hand, there is a potential fear of public transit and using buses and trains, which comes with a certain level of risk. Equally, there would be people who would be Uber users before, who would think about saying, should I use my private as a shared transport? Sorry, I think there is some sort of All right, are you all able to still hear me?
Yes, please, now it's fine.
Yes, please.
Yes, sorry, I was going to say that we think that there will be some public transit users who might use a car sharing service a little bit more. Equally, some ride sharing users might go to using private vehicles. So it's very difficult to say whether it will go up or go down. What I will tell you is that we are considering a whole host of measures that we will deploy post-lockdown. So basic things like providing masks and sanitization type of products to our drivers, as well as making it compulsory for riders to use the masks, potentially exploring the use of the Arogya Setu app, depending on how that evolves, as a way to provide comfort to both the driver and rider. Equally, remember, this is not just a rider side issue, it is drivers at risk as well. Interestingly, and this is the German connection, we are exploring all kinds of disinfecting solutions. Right now, the one we are trialing is a German product, which has, which is EPA cleared, as well as has genuinely proven itself to be effective in hospital grade settings that we use to clean cars inside and outside so that the virus cannot stay. So we are exploring a whole host of solutions around improving safety on the driver and the rider side. These are in flight, and we should expect some of this to be in play as soon as the lockdown lifts, so that we can reassure our riders and drivers about this issue. The other question that you asked, Mr. Steinruecke, was around how do you think about organizing, unorganized workforces? And I actually think that this is where there is creativity required. If you actually just listen to our Prime Minister, he's actually been on record 3 or 4 times talking about the need for tractor aggregation, for farm equipment aggregation, so that efficiently and cheaply services are being provided to farmers. To me, equally, there is one example that I want to provide of Uber's own work. So across the globe, we have about 4 million workers on our platform, just pre-COVID. And we are working on a project that I think has just gone live, so it's in the public domain, that's called UberWorks, which is the idea that there is a work platform where all jobs, particularly those that are kind of the blue collar variety or the unorganized variety, are listed, and there is a formal exchange that is smartphone enabled that allows workers to find jobs and employers to find labor. The big benefit, in addition to the discoverability, is frankly the ability to electronically track, bring them into the formal system, make sure that the dues and the taxes that need to be paid are paid, and create real efficiencies in the job marketplace. Right? I could imagine that kind of a technology being applied to restaurant workers. It could be applied to food service folks, delivery folks, everybody who operates in the quasi inorganic type of unorganized market. Just as another example, we have live example discussions on with various state governments, because we have an electronic direct relationship with large number of workers, as also finding a way for that to play into how funding happens and how people can actually get paid what they deserve from the government schemes. As many people talked about today, a lot of the challenges that this just doesn't get delivered because the mechanisms don't exist. So I think opportunities are aplenty for applying this kind of a technology to organize the unorganized workforce today.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Question to Mr. Kumar. Mr. Kumar, of course, the NGOs are very active, and your NGO, of course, is one of the brilliant examples, but you yourself mentioned that there are limitations and that the demand or the question is so overwhelming. So, I mean, how do you think, or where does the solution lie? Is it a public-private partnership that might help to basically get the migrant laborers safe and get them food, etc.? Or is the central government in charge, or do we need the army? I don't know. What is your take?
Hi, thank you so much for asking this question. See, there are two folds. The debate is on the twofold, particularly. One thing about the current crisis about the repatriation back home for the migrant workers. And of course, at this moment, we are really worried about that how government is going to integrate these workers as soon as they reach their home in the rural areas, particularly. They will be facing a massive discrimination. I give you a small example. 2 days ago, I was visiting one of the short-term shelter home where the stranded migrants were staying. And he said that if government do not send me home in the next 48 hours, I will commit suicide. And I asked him why, because he said that I have a 9 months pregnant wife and she's waiting for me. Same thing, one worker said that I have ailing parents back home and there's nobody who can take care of them. If they die tomorrow, then what is the purpose of me being alive? I will also die. So there's a massive depression. There's a mental health question. There is a chaos in those questions. And there have been a proposal, for example, UP government, Madhya Pradesh government have already come up with some kind of plan, but nothing have been sort of materialized yet. So the whole thing is that if government start at least counting the numbers, at least start thinking about that, how many workers, how they want to repatriate them. We do have a manpower, we do have an army, we do have a national disaster response team. We do have a number of institutions who can organize, who can facilitate them. It's not a kind of dearth of institutions we have. The only thing is that what is a government plan? They are not opening the cards. That is the whole worry about that. Second thing about the whole industrial question, and I would definitely request to my Uber colleagues to really consider to supporting the traditional transport. I'm just giving one example, like a rickshaw across the country. There's so many rickshaw also use the Uber app. At least they should be given some kind of support. Some rickshaw members, rickshaw pullers, drivers may not be the part of the Uber app, but at least as a $1 billion company, they can consider supporting this direction. I'm just speaking on behalf of the workers who really need support from the industry. I'm not sure about the PPE partnership or the state response, but thus, as I said in the beginning, the industry, the government, the trade union, they should at least have a kind of tripartite meeting at this moment, the urgent tripartite meeting, and we should definitely discuss about the health of economy, the situation of different industry, as I talked about in length about the MSME sector, daily wages. Of course, they need to give in some kind of the wage or the income transfer, because the situation is hand to mouth. Every day they earn and they spend. There's no social security at all for those workers. So these workers should be kept as a separate constituency, and they should be given the income transfer. But as far as the workers who are in MSME or any kind of establishment, there has to be some kind of plan. It was very painful to see that how the big industrial group going to the Supreme Court and challenging government order not to pay the minimum wages is really kind of distressing news. And the state is not taking any position or any kind of stand is also a very shameful act. So I agree that we can think about a lot of ideas, a lot of plans. I'm not saying that industry is not really interested to support that, but I don't see anything concrete happening on the ground. It's been a month now. If something concrete can be done at this moment, we can revive economy, we can revive industry. But at this moment, I don't think so. I don't see anything concrete happening.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Kumar. Now, final question to Priya Naik. Ms. Naik, the question that was here was, will the Alliance continue to work also after the lockdown? And then how safe is the transfer of the funds to the workers? How is it secure? Two questions, Ms. Naik.
Okay, let me answer the second. So Super Money actually, or the platform that we are tying up with, has the ability to transfer money immediately. Uber, Swiggy, a whole bunch of Mahindra Logistics, a whole bunch of companies already have their workforce using it. Like I said, it's 3.5 lakh migrant workers who are using the platform. So any donor who actually provides money has complete transparency in terms of who they're funding, how quickly the money has gone, and also what happens next. So even the database is organized in various ways, so donors can choose whether they want to support women or differently abled or workers in a specific state or sanitation workers. So there's a lot of choice in terms of who one is able to support. And then we've just supported a whole bunch of auto rickshaw drivers, and then you'll be glad to know. So the intent is to serve the most marginalized. As I mentioned that, we have two phases in terms of how we're responding. One is ensuring that they're able to just get through the crisis. And so a lot of the digital cash transfer support is until the end of the lockdown. And after that, we're really planning a 1-year recovery phase where we're looking at re-employment, we're looking at reskilling, we're providing grants and other sort of working capital support to ensure that both workers that need to get back to their jobs are incentivized to come back ASAP. I know industry is worried that people won't come back until post-Diwali or until the situation clears up. And then others who are likely to lose jobs can either be retrained into other jobs or can be given other short-term livelihood opportunities, which we're also stitching together in partnership with the government. So, unlike Chandan, actually, in the last few weeks, we've seen a tremendous amount of creativity and collaboration amongst a diverse set of stakeholders. So, for example, my husband runs a private equity fund and does a lot of work in healthcare, and he and I had never really had a conversation about how philanthropic capital and commercial capital can come together. But not only are we talking, but we're stitching together these alliances in partnership with the government. So really seeing an outstanding amount of collaboration happen very, very quickly in the last few weeks to respond to the crisis.
Okay, I think that was a good statement at the end. Some hope, in spite of being very, very difficult. We've seen some of the municipal corporations changing into remarkable crisis managers. I don't know whether you've seen the presentation of the BMC commissioner that he made last week, and how the BMC in Mumbai is really active, quite remarkable. From nothing, they have started this huge team, and so there are many private sector initiatives, many government initiatives that are really trying hard to manage this unique and this first-time situation that we are facing here. I'm still positive with regard to the ability of Indian people to manage crisis, to manage crowds, to manage very difficult situations. So therefore, this discussion today, I think, was beneficiary for, I learned a lot. I hope everybody else as well. This is a start only, and every one of you who would like to be active, to contribute, who has ideas, please come up, contact us from Indo-German Chamber of Commerce, because we've been here for almost 65 years. We've seen a lot of crisis situations, difficult situations, but still the German companies have been here, like Bayer for 100 years, Siemens 150 years, and many companies very long, gone through very difficult times. So from that angle, also these difficult times, even though they may be unique for us today, we have managed challenges over the years, and therefore we will also manage that challenge. I'm absolutely positive and sure for that. So thank you very much for joining us here today. Please stay Indo-Touch, as we say, and follow our webinars. And if you have any questions, please send an email to sustainmarkets@indo-german.com or look at our website. We have a special Corona website where we have all the activities of the German companies, where we have NGOs that you can collaborate with, where we try to provide you with our contacts and services. Thank you very much for joining. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.